Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome everybody to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I'm your host, Mira Rubin, and I am delighted to introduce you today to Lauren Tucker, co-founder and former executive director of Kiss the Ground. Lauren is an entrepreneur and leader focused on evolving our food system. Through her consultancy Beyond the Farm, Lauren works on crop-specific regenerative agriculture projects in collaboration with the White Buffalo Land Trust. Drawing on her extensive network of regenerative agriculture leaders, farmers, ranchers, food product manufacturers, and scientists, Lauren co-founded and leads reNourish Studio, a cohort of food business leaders working to enable regeneration through their businesses. reNourish Studio is a project of Farmers Footprint. Lauren, welcome, welcome. It's so good to be here with you.
You too.
You have such an interesting history, and I'd love to just sort of do a little background on you, like what is the White Buffalo Land Trust, what is your Beyond the Farm consultancy, what was this, all these questions, what was the story with Kiss the Ground, and then I want to get to the meat of funny I'm saying meat, but the meat of what we're going to be talking about, which is reNourish Studio, because it's really such a revolutionary thing that you're doing there.
Thanks. Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you to give us a little bit of an idea of where you started with your regenerative journey.
Yeah, it's funny, whenever I'm asked this question, I always want to go almost all the way back to childhood because it's one long journey, right? But I grew up in a household where convenience foods, kind of like microwavable foods, were really exciting. My mom really didn't love cooking. It was, the 80s, and there was all this sense of freedom around not being a housewife and like being able to put food on the table every evening without that full act of like having to cook for hours. And so I think that there was this connection that I was craving that food actually provides. It's our deepest connection to the earth. It's our interaction with the planet. It's our interaction with ecosystems. There's something so joyful in like the processing and the picking and the growing of it and that whole process. And I think I was really craving that, but didn't know how to name it as a child. And I grew up in a place where there was a lot of income disparity and like in rural West Virginia. And as a kid, I just couldn't understand, like there was so much land, there was so much abundance, like in the mountains and the Appalachian Trail and the river. But like, why did kids not have food at school? Like it was very confusing to me. And so it led me to being interested in international studies and thinking I was going to like save the world through food aid or the UN or something like that. And then realized that I really didn't like international aid work, that it was this kind of repackaging of opening US markets abroad. And there were a lot of politics around the whole field. And so then, I had this big question in my life, an expensive degree and no idea what I was going to do with it. And I found food, and food just became, it's the one thing every human shares in common. Like I think we share a lot in common, but it's kind of an obvious, clear thing. Everybody eats and seeks food every day and has this connection. It's such a way to hack like our spiritual connection to the earth. And that's kind of grown in me over the years, that understanding. And yeah, so food just became this kind of endless curiosity. And I volunteered on farms in Northern California and took a permaculture design certificate, and in Los Angeles, of all places. I fell in love with farming in Los Angeles, which is really bizarre, like one of the biggest cities. But there's this thriving garden culture and permaculture subculture in LA, and we can grow things all year round, and there's fruit trees in people's backyards. And yeah, so through that whole exploration process, at some point I worked at Cafe Gratitude and met Ryland Engelhart, and then he and his friend Finian Makepeace got really, really inspired about soil carbon sequestration. And we're a group of friends. There were like 30 of us that started meeting in Ryland's living room every week. And it was just like this energy that drew us together, and so much excitement. And I think the excitement was really around, our whole lives we had been told environmentalism was about like do less, bike less, stop eating meat, even though that's, I think a very fragmented idea of reality. But, we're told like, don't use plastic bottles, or don't use straws to save the turtles, like all these ideas of like single actions that you're not supposed to do, which really aren't enrolling and don't make a lot of sense. And here we were sitting in this living room realizing that by, being more of a human in connection to the natural world and connection to the world, through farming, that we could draw carbon out of the atmosphere. And so it was this like big release of excitement and energy around, by participating, we can actually, do something about this thing that feels so overwhelming. So yeah, that was a many year journey with friends, and we created curriculum and did a lot of advocacy, and created a film and short films, and the organization is working on political campaigns now, working on the farm bill and continuing to educate. But yeah, at some point I left because I really wanted to work on the ground with farmers. And so I went to work with friends at White Buffalo Land Trust, who are managing land. They're stewards of land in Central California. They have a 1,000-acre ranch in Halama. And they're, integrating restoration and regenerative agriculture. So how can they restore oak woodlands and riparian areas as well as ranch cattle, instead of what had been happening on this ranch for a very long time, where the cattle were just degrading the land, and kind of everything, the conservation areas were left alone and not managed, and then the cattle were degrading the land because they were just left out to pasture. And so they're really working on, how do we interact more with our landscape to tend to it? And so the cattle are rotationally grazing and healing the grasslands, and then they're working on, thriving oak woodlands and riparian areas, and planting trees and things like that. So they work, to educate farmers and with farmers. And so I went to work with them and help them start a food brand called Figure 8 that they have. It's like a vinegar brand, and biltong is now their second product. It's so tasty.
Maybe could you give us a website that people can go check out?
I think it's figure8foods.com. Really, really tasty foods. And the whole idea behind the brand is, enabling regenerative agriculture and foods from regenerative agriculture. So I went and worked with them on that for a while, and realized that, the skill set they needed was sales and marketing. And I can kind of do that, but it's really not what I love to do, or where my energy is best fit. And so while I was there, we had, kind of projects emerged that I started working on. One was in cotton and one was in almonds. And so, yeah, basically those projects grew. And so that grew the work that I do with white buffalo. So we have 2 different projects in almonds where we're working with producers in the Central Valley of California, and we're asking questions about soil health and water and doing scientific studies, trialing different soil health practices, seeing what happens in working almond orchards when we implement these practices, what's the impact on soil carbon and nutrition, nutrient density, and water, and asking a lot of questions about, those are improvements to a current system, but yeah, what needs to change in the system as a whole. And they're doing a similar thing in cotton in collaboration with Fibershed, where we've, brought companies that are interested in sourcing cotton together with producers, and then really built a farm forward supply, which is pretty unusual
What
in
does that
fiber
mean?
systems.
What does that mean, farm forward supply?
Yeah, it just means that usually as a fiber brand, like a clothing brand or a sheeting brand, or even we work with a tampon brand, all of them are sourcing from one of the last people in that supply. So you're sourcing from a fabric distributor, or maybe a spinner, or maybe a manufacturer, depending on the product. But we really built the relationship at the farm. And that meant that we were tracing, so they're purchasing the fiber from the farm, and then we trace it through the merchant all the way to the spinner or to the manufacturer. And then it goes, to the weaver, and then the cut and sew. And so it goes all the way through this process, but we're starting first with the relationship at the farm. It allowed us to almost double the price at the farm, which allowed for a lot more experimentation and risk management in reducing chemicals and trialing soil health practices. And we're doing things like integrating sheep and starting to manage for more life on the farm, and really increasing soil biodiversity and biodiversity on the land itself. But all of that is really scary for a farm, especially in our current production model. And so by working together and reversing that supply, we were able to figure out how to do that together. These projects emerged, and so I they're multi-year projects. In cotton, we have a coalition that is adding new brands every year. In almonds, we have 2 5-year research studies, so they're long-term projects. And I think for me, it's been a really, really humbling experience, because here I, sat in a garage office in Venice, California with Kiss the Ground, and made films about soil health and soil carbon sequestration. And I made a lot of assumptions about, how could a farm use chemicals? What were they thinking? This destroys the soil life. This makes no sense. And, I thought I was really open and kind, but I think in many ways I was being very judgmental of producers and othering them in a way. It's like, oh, we're in the right. We're thinking about soil health and all these things, and you're kind of in the wrong. Why are you pouring chemicals on the land? And in going to work in the Central Valley, it's just been really humbling to hear that, people care about their families, about legacy on land. They care deeply about this place and the sustainability and viability of being able to live in this place for generations. A lot of these farming families are 3, 4, 5 generations stewardship of the same land. And their directive is don't lose the farm. And don't lose the farm in our current industrialized food system means, do anything to make it produce and pay the taxes and pay the family, and figure out that model. And so chemicals are risk mitigation. And when we have pest pressure, it's a way to manage risk.
I want to put a pin in that because there's so many equations that we take for granted as truth.
Mm,
And I think, you just spoke one of them is that chemicals are mediation, are insurance essentially. And that equation, you're rethinking that, you're re-educating to that, and creating a new equation. And actually, as I'm listening to you speak, I'm hearing that on every aspect of your communication. Like that. And I'm jumping ahead because I know I wanted to talk about reNourish Studio, which it should be called Rethink Studio. Because in my experience of you are very much about creating a new context and creating a new container, a new way of thinking about pretty much everything that I've encountered in our conversation so far. So it didn't surprise me in the least that when I asked you about your path to regeneration, you started when you were a child. It didn't surprise me that you're talking about how humbling this experience was to recognize that you had othered these people, that you had judged them without a deep, rich understanding of who they are as human beings and what their purpose is. And so this is such an important, the I love your experience and I love your knowledge, and I love that you're bringing that to this conversation. And the thing that intrigues me most profoundly about you is your willingness and courage and boldness in rethinking, because that is the foundation of the change that we're going to be bringing to the planet.
mhm.
And I just wanted to put a pin in that because I want everybody else that's listening to this to be listening to it through that new lens of rethinking. And so thank you for being willing to challenge your own notions. It takes courage to challenge your own awareness of how things are, and the righteousness that we so easily adopt, right?
Totally. Yeah, and I found that it's really important to do it in community. I had the great honor of being part of a community that's working on um, revealing what is our current paradigm of thinking and seeing what it takes to develop our thinking. And that would never work in isolation. Like, it's really something that's hard to do. I'm a nerd. I love reading books and writing, and sure, there's a certain amount of reflection that you can do on your own, but I think that communities are really, really powerful for holding our development and working together and seeing things in different ways and being able to ask questions that get you to a different place in your mindset or open up something new. And I think that the community part is so important in the way we evolve, the way we see things, and in working on understanding in different ways.
Well, I'd like to call that out, if I may. I mean, I know that you're working with Carol Sanford and a bunch of other thinkers and doers and beers. The other thing that I heard you emphasize is being, when you were talking about what was happening in I don't remember exactly which context, but I heard you emphasize the word being rather than the doing, and I think that that's so fundamental to where we're headed. And I know that, as I said, you're mentored or part of a collective with Carol Sanford and friends, we'll say. And I'm wondering, for those folks who are unfamiliar with her work, if you might be able to just say a few words about what the nature of that work is. You
Totally.
already did, but even a little bit more.
Yeah. So Carol comes from she had a teacher that brought her into this type of work. And there's almost a long lineage of folks who have been stewarding four-way work, which is, one way to talk about this. Instead of looking at the two-force world or three-dimensional world, we're like bringing in other forces. And I'm pretty sure the fourth path, it's like not the monk, it's not the like going off in the woods, it's like developing as you go through life. But yeah, I had friends in the regenerative ag community that were in Carol's school, and was invited in with very little context, like, hey, you should really come check out this thing. And I found it extremely confronting at first, right? There's no experts, there's no knowledge, there's nothing really to learn in a traditional sense. And it's so opposite of the way I learned growing up, like the US public school system, and yeah, just how I've operated my whole life. I also, for me, so much emphasis throughout my life was put on function. Like, it doesn't matter kind of how angry you are or how upset you are, just get the thing done. And
Just do it.
The production of whatever it was the most important. Where in reality, the way we're being as we cook a meal, or as we go to work, or are in a meeting, or are working on strategy, like that actually in some ways matters a lot more. And I don't think our culture honors that really
I
at
agree
all.
with you. And I'm gonna give you the hard task here of saying, how does it matter more? How could it possibly matter more? I mean, I'm right there with you, but I'm gonna put it on you to see if there's a way to illuminate that for folks.
Yeah, well, it just shifts everything. It creates a field when you're with other people and being in a certain way. So yeah, I mean, cooking is a very simple example. It's like you can functionally cook dinner for your family, and you can be kind of mad from your day or distracted or like annoyed that you have to get this thing on the table, and you like grab all the ingredients, get it done, slam it down on the table, and it's like, let's eat. Or you can, really honor the food and like love that experience, and you can involve your kids while you're cooking, and you can like sing while you're cooking, or, have really wonderful conversations, and then you can set the table and like really honor where the food came from. And that sets the stage for a very different dinner conversation, right? And there's openness and engagement and knowledge transfer between generations, and there's so much that can happen in that being state all together as a family or a group of friends, that wouldn't happen if you're in the like rushed context, right?
It also creates a whole different reference point for mealtime,
Mhm.
for eating, for family, for all of it.
Yeah. And then when you take it out to any context, right? It's like, if I showed up to the cotton farms that I'm working with and said, hey, I'm here to advocate for no chemicals and soil carbon sequestration, and this is the way we do it, and I'm backed up by all this science and all these experts, and I'm right and you're wrong, like, you're never going to work together. But when we came in and we really created this field of like curiosity, we're like, you know what? I don't know anything about your business, and I'm here to learn. And then we brought companies in and said, hey, we don't really know anything about your business. And so then we have the farm in the room and the company in the room and all of the people, in this coalition in the room. And then we brought the merchant into the room, and we're like, well, maybe the farm doesn't really trust what you do. What do you do? What is your role in the system? Why do you take money off the top? Oh, you class the bales, you allocate the bales, you take money from the federal government to pay the farm immediately even though the actual cotton isn't sold for 18 months. You like plays all these roles in the system. But we really came to the table with like, we don't know. And, you know, here are brands that care about soil carbon sequestration, and here are farms that care about the sustainability of farming in the Central Valley. And we all have questions about water, and we all have questions about chemicals, and we might be on different sides of these issues. But when we come together and we just care about each other, like that being state allows for us to work together in very different ways than if we were to come in and advocate for, you know, like, I'm right, you're wrong, here's the science, this is what we're going to do, I'm going to force you to do it, here's the standard I need you to meet, I'm going to pay this price for this standard. Like, it's a shutdown. So yeah, I think it's been the hardest lesson for me over the years, actually, is that being actually matters in some ways more.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to unwind those habits, and those habits of, yeah, what matters is winning, or what you produce, or getting the A, or
Yeah. Getting stuff done.
Mhm.
Forget about the being, just get it done.
Yeah.
Right?
Drink more coffee. I know you're miserable. Drink more coffee.
Exactly. I love it. And this is so much at the heart of my belief, and the work that I do too, is to be moving into that state of being and allowing the action to be informed from that deep inspiration and that deep connection. And so I guess we're going to jump ahead a little bit to, because this is such a perfect segue to reNourish Studio, because all of these principles are being applied in what you're doing with reNourish Studio, which I consider pretty revolutionary, to be bringing all these stakeholders into the same think tank that's more than a think tank, that's a being and evolutionary tank, whatever we want to call it, to create something new in business, not just regenerative farming, although that doesn't deserve the word just in front of it. I don't mean to belittle it, but to take business into a new paradigm. So I'm just if you would just explain a little bit more about reNourish Studio, and because I consider it really profoundly revolutionary and evolutionary. So please.
Cool. Yeah, so I mean, this project is it's the most exciting and probably hardest thing I've ever done. And it comes from, you know, it took a big leap for me to take this project on, because essentially I said, you know, instead of working through living systems thinking, which I've been working on understanding through the Carol Sanford School, and then also a lot of work with Regenesis Institute, instead of taking it as like something I think about on the side, which is really awesome, it's like, okay, how do we actually apply this to work as a whole? So it's a big promise, what we promised, but we essentially brought together a group of 20 businesses, and it's a 3-year journey. And what we're working on together is, how can our businesses enable the conditions for life to thrive? So, you know, I think we've gotten really stuck in continuous improvement. And so we have the current system, and then, you know, oh, well, we're not, you know, we're extracting too much, so let's create sustainability metrics, or let's do less harm, or let's put things in place that have us not extract so fast. And like, everything has become this improvement. But the system as a whole really has to shift. In food, we're, you know, it's a system that creates calories, not nourishment, because nourishment has many dimensions than just being fed. And it's a system that really operates on this, I think, foundational value and belief that scarcity is the way the world operates. And it's extractive in nature. And that's our current commercial food system, where I really believe that the process of growing food, tending ecosystems, bringing it all the way to table, all the way to composting and back again, that whole system of fooding, it's spiritual in nature. It is, celebratory. Like food is extreme celebration. We're just celebrating it in these really fragmented ways through our industrial food system, right? Like Doritos are celebratory. They're awesome. Like, I'm sorry, I eat like really healthy. Doritos taste amazing. But they're not a celebration or like this spiritual connection to the whole. We didn't care about, in a deep way, how we tended that land. We didn't care about the people who touched that product. We didn't care about how it was packaged. We're certainly not caring about how we're nourishing people with, all the chemicals in it and like the things that trick our taste buds. And so, yeah, ultimately, I think the system needs to change. And working with regenerative farms, like we just brought up the economic model over and over again. And I think that we have a real problem in the regen ag movement because we're not looking at regeneration as a whole. We're saying like, oh, we can regenerate soils. Don't worry about it. Keep the industrial food system just the way it is. But instead of buying, conventional or buying organic, now you're going to buy regenerative. And it's awesome that we're going to tend more soil in healthful ways and bring back soil biology, but it's a fragment of what needs to happen in our overall system. So in this project, we're essentially looking the opposite way at business and saying, what does the business need to become? Who does the business need to be in order to evolve the system? And so we're creating a container where we deeply are being nourished. So we meet, 3 times a year in really deep food experiences and together. And then we're working on Zoom on our businesses and, working on how we think so that we can see from that opposite lens and even start to, see into how can our business enable regeneration in the world or life thriving, and then how can our business impact the community that it's a part of, which then in turn can impact the system. I think often we skip kind of the who's in our sphere to influence. It's like, I started a business to change the world. It's like, well, you'll be all over the place. But if you really deeply think about who is in your sphere to influence. So, you're a almond pizza brand, like you're in the gluten-free industry, or you're in the natural food products industry, or in the nut industry. Like, okay, that could be in your sphere of influence. And if you can influence that industry, then yeah, you'll change the food system in some way. So we're working on systems change through real businesses. Everyone in the cohort either has an up and running business or is in an early stage of a venture. We ended up with farmers, philanthropists, food investors, food brands. We have people who certify foods. So we have a couple certifications. We have someone working in a local food hub. We have someone who educates farmers. Like the diversity of the businesses is kind of unusual, but the point is to, really work on this. And it's such an exciting project and equally as frightening, because if we don't make it, then I don't know what else to do, right? Like if we can't figure out how to evolve our businesses to actually enable the system to trend in a nourishing direction, then I don't know what else to do. Like, I'm sorry, but soil carbon sequestration is awesome. It's not going to save the day. because we're suffering from so much more than just lack of carbon in the soil. We're suffering from like caring for each other, and the whole of humans and ecosystems, we're all suffering together. So yeah, I think, this is meant as an acupuncture point in the system. Like if we can work on business in a way that enables regeneration, then hopefully we can inspire the regenerative ag movement to shift the way it's looking. But yeah, it's, in many ways it's a moonshot, right? Like we have a plan, we know how we're working, we know where we want to go, but it's a big project.
Well, I think it is a big and ambitious and visionary project. However, earlier you were talking about how you brought all these different people into the room so that people could understand the whole chain, the whole supply chain, and have a deeper level of communication and eliminating the othering, where you're humanizing the whole process. And I think it's brilliant that you have such a diversified cohort, because there are people that are perceiving these issues from very different vantage points and bringing them into dialogue. These are people that probably would never be talking to each other about these topics, about business or about food systems. So what you're doing is existing on so many different levels of education, of experimentation, of creativity, and creating relationship. Like that's the foundation, is creating relationship and moving beyond the othering.
Mhm.
And othering of everything, not only other human beings, but of nature, of the things that we interact with in life, the sources of our sustenance. So I think that the other thing that's really, really important that moved me so deeply in your work is going to business, going to regenerating the whole notion of business, because we have been raised with the notion that money makes the world go round.
Yeah.
And that if we have a redefinition of that money generator business or whatever, then if we have a reconceptualization of that, then there is hope and possibility. And I don't think you can fail. I think it may not happen in 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, but I don't think that you can fail. This is something that we're called for. In it's a thought form that we get to be cultivating more and more broadly.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of power in this idea of planning for 7 generations. And, a lot of our economic system and our industrial food system is suffering from really short-term pressure, short-term profit needs. And yeah, so what does my generation, all the generations alive on the planet right now, what do we all do now that enables the next generation to keep going? And I think that that's like the most exciting and scary part about this moment in time, right? Like, I think a lot of people are waking up to, oh, we could extract this planet so much that we might all die. And that means there is no generation that gets to figure it out here, right? And it's so exciting because there's a lot of creativity and energy, and I think quantum leaps and things that can happen really, really fast. It's like when you go to a funeral and you reevaluate your whole life. It's like that moment, like humanity's facing, oh, we really didn't care for this planet. Not everyone. There are tons of cultures that have been continuing to care for the planet, but as a whole, as you know, most of us were not. And so, yeah, it's an exciting moment.
It is. It is. I want to talk about when I first met you.
Oh, cool.
So it was meant to be, because it was just sort of a, I don't believe in coincidence, but it was like a flurry of these wonderful little coincidences. And I ended up attending a live or a Zoom, live Zoom of presentation of reNourish Studio before it actually really launched. So it was an opportunity to learn about what you guys were doing. And rather than attending a lecture, I was very, very surprised and deeply moved by the way you conducted that session. And I presume that that is very much how the sessions with reNourish are conducted. But it was an engagement experience where you posed questions, really, really deeply provocative questions. You wouldn't think that, what did you have for breakfast this morning? And what's the food chain behind it? There would be a provocative question, but it was to truly engage in that. And I'd like, and as a result, because we don't have enough time in this interview, unfortunately, to really experience it collectively together, but in the process of that awareness, or those questions that I did allow myself to engage in, my whole perception of my role in the system was radically transformed, and my awareness of the system, as much as I try to be aware, was radically transformed. Talk about a humbling experience.
No.
And so I'm wondering if you might, I have two questions about that. One is, maybe you can share that question or a couple of those questions so that our audience can ponder those things themselves to come to a new awareness. But also, I want to talk about, how did you arrive at that methodology? Because it was so impactful, so profound.
Yeah. So I tried doing it many other ways and it didn't work. The Socratic way of working really comes from the epistemology of the school that I've been in with Carol Sanford. And so I've definitely learned a lot of that way of working there.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second, because I want to make sure that nobody feels lost. And so if you could define epistemology, and if you could just sort of give us a clue of what the Socratic method is, because you're steeped in it, but it's probably unfamiliar to some folks.
Yeah. So epistemology, I think the way you describe it, it's like how we come to know what we know. And so, you know, in the school that I've been a part of, it's all around asking questions, which is the Socratic method, right? Like Socrates would always, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I guess he would always like someone would ask a question, he would ask a question in response. It's the kind of continuing questioning. It removes the hierarchy, or it's meant to, between kind of teacher and student, right? It's like you're on a developmental journey together. And the role shifts where, we see teachers as experts who, provide information that we're meant to memorize. Sometimes we question it, but usually we don't. Where this whole idea is that, really the role is to ask questions that get you to see deeper in your own thinking. And so we found it incredibly hard to describe what it might feel like to join reNourish Studio. And we tried pitch decks, we tried to write a website, and people were so confused. And they're like, but what's the one-liner? What do I get out of it? I don't get it. And so I've been working with a team in the studio. It's been a team of 7, and a lot of us are coming from Regenesis or the Carol Sanford School, and they're all really incredible colleagues. And so we work together to figure out, what could an experience of the studio be that would land, the intent of the studio, the value of the studio, as well as kind of how does it feel to work on Zoom when someone's asking you questions. And so we ended up with that session that you attended. And I think people who attended the earlier on ones, sometimes it wasn't landing, and we continued to iterate it. And so we really found the container that got us there. And the opening question, was really about when we look at something specific, like what we had for breakfast, but then we look at, then we're able to go in our own experience. So it's not like in the air or in theory, because if I just went out and said, hey, what do you value in our current system and what's the value not being delivered? It might be hard to come up with an answer that wasn't kind of generic. But when we went to look at what did you have for breakfast, it's like, cool, what was the value to you of that meal? What were the current values delivered? And then what wasn't there? What was missing? And then we took that out to say, okay, what is our current food system? And what is it providing? It's providing a lot. Again, we're not in the current food system bad, emergent food system good. It's not good, bad, right, wrong. There's a lot to value in our current food system. We have, you can eat a banana anywhere on the planet, any day of the year, or most places on the planet. Every grocery store in the US essentially looks the same. There's consistency. There is so much around health and safety. You don't go to the grocery store and wonder if you're going to get food poisoning. That doesn't really, here and there, sure, but it really doesn't exist in our food system. So there are all of these wonderful things that our current food system is delivering. And so we were uplifting those and then talking about, what else is not here? Our spiritual connection. We don't really know how farms were treated or how workers were treated or how the land was treated when you make a purchase of food. And so we started to talk about kind of, that gap between where we are and where we might want to go. And then we had everyone reflect on what would be the difference if we had started the call with climate change, impending doom, all these terrible things. And we reflected on how that made us feel and the being state, right? And so we were really looking at what does it look like to work from potential instead of this continuous improvement. And that's a lot of the foundation of how I understand regeneration. It's, we're going back to what's essential about something and regenerating anew. And then, also looking into what's the potential of something. And you're bringing something new into reality instead of working on kind of continuous improvement of current existence. So we created that as an experience as part of our invitation process, so that also people could decide this is a space for me or this is really not a space for me. And we ended up with an incredible cohort, and certainly there are voices not in the room, right? And that's something we're working on too, is how do we deeply consider everyone and not judge and other people, so that for the people not in the room, so that we're really understanding their perspective too. And I think we're going to need a lot of that if we're going to evolve systems that really work for everyone and not just a select few. So
I want to be respectful of our time. And I also have to ask you, what's your vision?
I think that what drives me the most is connection. And I think that there's a lot of suffering around disconnection, whether it's on a personal, like intimate level, whether it's on a family level or a society level, or a relationship with, I actually believe we're one with Mother Earth. And so that disconnection that we feel it's bizarre because we're just blocking something that already exists. But I just wish to live in a more connected world, with each other, with the planet. And I think that food is a really easy way to cut through all the noise, and to have those deeply connected and spiritual experiences. You can really go there in an instant with food, or on a farm, or in a forest or something. And so I wish that everyone can go there in their lives and experience connection, and then see that there are other possibilities, right? Our economic system is really not working, for the majority of people. It's working for some, but it was made up, right? It's not law. I think the only thing that is law in a way is how living systems work, because that's
That concept is that it was made up is in itself revolutionary. Because, yeah, of course it was made up, but we don't think of it that way.
Right. We take it as immovable. And so, I feel really inspired to work in a place that feels immovable, because I think that means it's something we need to work on.
How will you know that your experiment with reNourish has been successful?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we're still in long conversations internally as a team around, like, how do you measure this in a way that's not, that's not mechanical.
Yeah.
But I think that we'll know based on the experiences of the businesses in the cohort. And one thing we did when we all started is we wrote down where we were currently in our thinking about our business, kind of current challenges. A survey of how we saw our business in its current state and its relationship to regeneration. So I think it'll be a lot in the looking back and saying, where were we, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and where are we now? I think that, we'll know it worked because we're building being states and fields. And we're not looking at our strategic plans as just functional. We're looking at, what is a role of a business to, create an environment where people are participating in evolution. And it's not led, it's not my vision or the business owner's vision that everyone gets on board with. That's mission work. That's advocacy. That's, movement work, which I think has a place, but in many ways is very detrimental, because it's like moving in one person's direction, where, I think what we're really aiming for is to enable everyone to participate. And so we'll know based on, I think, the energy around all the businesses. And, and we have a hypothesis that we don't have to completely reject profit in order to do this, right? So I think that there's a lot of assumptions that it's either profit and extraction or no profit. And so we're saying, like, how can a business create the conditions for thriving communities at the same time, while, having money flow in and through it. We'll know if the businesses are succeeding too.
Lauren, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you have any resources to share with folks.
Oh, interesting. I think, my life has been deeply impacted by the Carol Sanford School and by Regenesis Institute. I recommend checking out both of them. They both have, developmental communities Regenesis has courses, a lot of books around them.
I'm actually taking the TRP, Regenerative
Wonderful.
Practitioner course right now through Regenesis. And Carol Sanford has a bunch of books as well.
She does, yeah. Yeah, I've also been deeply impacted by tending the wild and braiding sweetgrass. Both are, uplifting essentially how we viewed Indigenous peoples from a European perspective as, we just viewed the cultures incorrectly. And so these books really talk about, that relationship of human and community and land as one, and I think give a lot of insight around how we might evolve into that for these modern times and for this moment we're in. And so
we'll make sure to put links to the books on our website at sustainabilitynow.global for anybody that wants to be checking them out afterwards. Any other ones? Any other goodies for us? Obviously, Kiss the Ground, the movie.
Yeah, Kiss the Ground, the movie is great. It's on Netflix. Yeah, and I have a good friend who wrote a book called Grounded. Her name's Dr. Erin McMorrow. And it's about, she was early days on the couch, Kiss the Ground. She was actually the first ED for a couple months. And she started first writing a book about soil carbon sequestration and the science around it, and ended up writing a book about femininity and restoring sacred feminine. And so it's about like how, tending to the soil and tending to sacred feminine and restoring those are actually one. And it's a really beautiful, different opinion in this space. And I think it's inspired a lot of people.
Wonderful, thank you. And so how about websites for you that people could go and learn more about reNourish? And
so let's see, whitebuffalolandtrust.org. That's incredible community to track and be a part of. And then there's
you didn't really say anything about Beyond the Farm.
Oh yeah, so I ended up in all these projects as a consultant. So then I opened a consultancy. So that's how I move through all the work I do in the world.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Other websites.
That's okay. So yeah, White Buffalo Land Trust, Figure 8 Foods, and then Farmer's Footprint. I'm not remembering if it's a .us or .com or .org.
I think it is .us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
so reNourish is through there as well.
Perfect. Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
No, the one thing that I feel inspired to share is just, I think, my life has been profoundly changed by working on a direction instead of a goal. And I just, so much has come from this pursuit of connection and food and deepening relationship to the earth. And it's not like, what kind of house I want to live in or what kind of car I want to have or what title at work. It's just a pursuit of a direction. And it's taken me all over the world to the most incredible experiences and allowed me to be a contribution in ways I could have never imagined. And so just encouraging everyone to, take that leap into the unknown and pursue, direction that you're called to, instead of the kind of functional goals that we think about when we sit down to plan our lives.
Thank you so much. Such wise words, and it's been such a delight speaking with you, Lauren. Thank you.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who are listening and carrying the torch. And please, please share this out widely if you've enjoyed it, if you've learned something from it. I also want to say a deep thank you to my partner in crime at Sustainability Now, Scott Billy, who's also our producer. And that's it for today. Until next time, live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can save the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.